Okay, recording started. I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm going to start my slideshow. There we go. There we go. Can everybody see my screen? Somebody give me a little nod there. Welcome everyone to the Heartland Foundation's program on the FAFSA webinar. And tonight we are going to talk about how to complete your 2020-2021 FAFSA. Now this is the FAFSA form for next academic year. So students starting as freshmen in college next year, students who are already in college this year would be completing this form. Why would you fill out a FAFSA? And I say this because all students need to fill out a FAFSA. And the reason for that is there are lots of scholarship dollars out there from colleges that won't be awarded if your student hasn't filled out a FAFSA. So even if you don't think you're going to get need-based financial aid, which is what the FAFSA directly is, you still need to fill out the form. On average, FAFSA awards funding for families that make less than $75,000 a year as an adjusted gross income. So realize that filling out the FAFSA does nothing to guarantee you funding, but it does make you eligible for funding. So that is why we're always pushing to make sure you get your FAFSA filled out. So to prepare for the FAFSA, here are the things you need to do. Set up a FAFSA account and get a FAFSA ID. Now you could do this prior to October 1st, you can still do this now. But what the FAFSA ID does is it gives you access to the online system and it can be used as your legal signature. Now there's a key when completing your FAFSA ID. Please make sure your name matches exactly as it does on your social security card. If you're a student who uses a nickname or a parent who doesn't use their legally given name, make sure that's the name you use when you fill out the FAFSA because it's going to link to the IRS. And so those names need to match in order for that to happen. Otherwise, you're going to have to fill it out by hand, send it in, and do it that way. And the electronic data transfer won't happen with the IRS. So that means you have to fill in your tax information by hand, and that can be really challenging. The other thing is make sure you record the FAFSA ID and password because this is what you're going to use the entire time your student is in college. And if you're a parent and you have multiple students in college, you can use the same FAFSA ID throughout all your students' colleges careers. So the website to get your FAFSA ID is on the bottom of the screen. I think I'm going to have Paul put that in the chat line, but it's fasaid.ed.gov. And if you go there, you can click on the thing that says create a FAFSA ID. The rest of the site is an actual direct link to create my FAFSA ID. So you can complete the FAFSA forms on the FAFSA website. And if you just Google search FAFSA, it'll take you right to the site. You don't really need to record this website information. It's just quicker to Google it. You can also get an app on your phone. This was new last year and they had pretty good success with it. So if you're a family that is more phone savvy and app savvy than laptop savvy, then this is a great opportunity for you. You just go to either the Apple Store or Google Play and download it. If you downloaded the app last year, you need to go in and download it again this year because you need the updated FAFSA and to get updated access. So even if you use the app last year, make sure you go in and update it so that you have the current FAFSA on file. That's one of the things that students didn't realize they needed to do. And so make sure that you're doing that. Now let's really talk about the FAFSA form. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite topics. What do you need to fill out your FAFSA form? You need your social security number. You need your alien resident number if you're not a US citizen. Your most recent federal tax return, your W-2s, any records of money earned. The good news is the federal tax IRS transfer app is working really well. So you can generally transfer your tax return directly into your FAFSA, and you don't actually have to have the physical IRS form printed out, but I'm going to have you print one out anyway. And the reason for that is that if your student gets selected for verification, they have to bring in a tax return. And if you're doing all this now and you just put all this stuff together, put it in a folder and write FAFSA on it, then you're going to give that to your student when they go to college. So if they get selected for verification, you have all the documents there you need for that. You need copies of bank statements and records of investments, records of untaxed income, and then your FAFSA ID to sign the form. So the actual FAFSA form has 8 parts. Steps 1 through 3 are all student information. Okay, so when you're filling out the form, there's a student section, there's a parent section, and then there's a signature section. So the first section is all about the student, their demographics, their income, the student's tax return. And the student tax return is on there first, so don't get confused as a parent by that. Make sure you're doing the student's tax return first. Now, in this first demographics section, there are 3 questions I want to point out and how to answer them. First, question 22. It's for male students only. And it says they must register for selective service. So it asks, are you registered for selective service, yes or no? If you click no on that, it will give you a second question that says, register me, and that's what you want to select. All male students have to be registered for selective service or they're not eligible for federal financial aid. Those are the rules. So make sure you do that. Now, lots of male students are not 18 yet. And if you're not 18, you don't have to register for selective service. And that's why I like that button that says register me, because then when the student turns 18, it'll automatically register them and you won't have to worry about this when they get to college and they're not registered for some reason. Question 28 asks, what degree are you working on? And while you may be trying to get a higher degree, like your ultimate goal may be to get a PhD. That's great. But for right now, for this form right now as a freshman, you are working on your first bachelor's degree. And even if you don't know your major, even if you don't know what you're doing, first bachelor's degree. If you mark undecided on there, you're not eligible for federal financial aid, because you may be undecided about your major, but you're not undecided about the fact that you're working on your bachelor's degree. So we want to make sure you mark that. The other question is question 29. You have never attended college. Even if you've taken a class or 2 here and there, a college class here and there, you have never attended college. Step 4 is parent information. It's demographics, it's household income and resources and investments, IRAs and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to go really into depth on section 4 because there's lots of questions here about household income and how to report that and all of that. Now, step 5 is for students who are not a dependent. So if you are a student who is independent from your parents somehow, to be independent, you may be in the military, you could have a dependent child of your own, or you can have yourself declared independent through the courts. And those are basically the only 3 ways to not be a dependent on the FAFSA form. There's a couple others. If you're in foster care, if you were in foster care, you're automatically not a dependent. But generally for our students are dependents. And so they're not going to fill out the information in section 5. Section 6 is colleges and where you're going to send your FAFSA. There's a list of FAFSA codes for every college and it's in the FAFSA form. But if you want to speed up the process, look those up online beforehand. Just do a little quick Google FAFSA code for, pick your school, NYU. That's what I'm picking today. And it will give you the FAFSA code and you can just have it written down so that when you get to that section, you can just type in the code and not have to search every time you're listing a new school. That will just help speed up the process a little bit. Now, FAFSA only allows you to send it to 10 schools at once. So once you submit it, and submit it to those 10 schools. You can go back in and modify your schools or add more schools on, but just know it is going to limit you to 10 when you first start. Step 7 is just signing and dating your FAFSA. And step 8, this is really important. Send a PDF copy. It asks you if you want to print a copy for your records. You want to say yes, save it as a PDF, send it to your coach. I've reviewed 4 FAFSAs in the last 2 days. I've got some kids who are really on top of it, got those done really fast. They've all had corrections. I have yet to see one that doesn't have a correction from me. So please make sure you send it to your coach before you submit it, because before you submit it, you can change anything on the form. Once you submit it, once you submit your FAFSA, there are certain things on there that you are not eligible to change. There are things that you can change, like you can add schools and that kind of thing, but there's certain information that cannot be changed once you submit it. So please make sure you send it to your coach first. All right. Now we're going to talk about some special items to pay attention to. I covered a few things when we first started about the student section, because those are more demographic things. These are some more details on some of those other specific questions. Question 11 asks for your driver's license. If you have a driver's license as a student, please put it in there. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. But if you have one and don't put it in there, it just raises questions, because they know with the state that you have a driver's license. So put your driver's license number in there. Question 22 about selective service, we already talked about that. Questions 24 and 25 ask about your parents' highest level of education. And this is your parents' highest level of education in the United States. So if you have a parent who has a PhD from the Philippines, but that PhD is no good in the United States, like they can't use it as a PhD to work, don't put that. Put high school. The reason for that is schools have a handful of funding for first-time college students. And essentially, if your parents did not get their education in the United States, you're a first-time college student. So we want to make you eligible for as much funding as possible. Now, don't lie either on there. Just what's your parents' highest level of education, okay? Question 26 is worded really funny, and the question can be confusing for students because you're currently in school, but at the end of this year, you will have your high school diploma. So that is the answer to that question. Most of our students are not getting GEDs or, what's the other one on there? Homeschool. So if you are homeschooled, you can put the homeschool completion question on there, but it asks for specifically, what did you do? What's your homeschool curriculum? And it's going to ask more questions on there. Okay, then it's going to ask you college grade level. You have question 29, and I talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. You've never attended college. Even if you've taken college classes in high school, dual enrollment at the community college, you're going to put never attended college. Now you can answer some college, but still first year, if you have personally, not through your high school, enrolled in college classes, and you've taken more than 1 or 2, 3 classes. If you have 12, 15 college credits that you have taken while you're in high school outside of your high school curriculum, and these things are not going to show up on your high school transcript, then you can put attended college before and first year undergrad. But other than that, never attended college. And if you're one of those students kind of in that special circumstance, check with your coach. They can help you with that question. Question 30 is type of degree or certificate. This is your first bachelor's degree. And if you don't put first bachelor's degree, you won't be eligible for aid. Okay, so I don't think we have any students who already have a bachelor's degree. So make sure you're putting first bachelor's degree there. Oh, yeah, That's it. And then question 31, it's asking if you're interested in work study. This one is invariably the question that I'm changing for students a lot. And the reason for that is because students are like, I don't want to work while I'm at school, but yes, you do. You're going to perk yes here, and this is why. Because you could find a job on campus. You could have a faculty member ask you to join their research team. You could have somebody on campus ask you to work for them. And if you check yes there, then you're eligible to receive federal funding for your work, for the work that you do. And other times there are faculty who can only hire students who said yes on their FAFSA to work study. So you want to make yourself eligible for that. Just because you're awarded it doesn't mean you have to take it, but it's important to make sure that you make yourself eligible like that. Okay. Then make sure, oh shoot. Sorry guys, I clicked the wrong button. And then on your college list, make sure you put in every college you plan to apply to or are considering. It's easier to do this up front than to go back and add colleges. So, and like I said, there is a limit of 10. So make sure you're doing that. Okay. How are we doing? I'm not seeing the chat line. So I'm gonna just really quickly take a peek at the chat line and see how we are. Okay, if you already have your associate's degree and your high school diploma, then you are going to answer second year undergrad, sophomore. And the reason you're doing that is because really you have 60 credits and you're probably transferring in as a junior, but if the college you transfer into doesn't take all those credits and doesn't classify you as a junior, you would rather be classified as a sophomore because it gives you extra time at the four-year school. So yeah, if you've done early high school and have that associate's degree, you can put second year undergrad, sophomore. Let's see what else I got. All right. This is the section I'm going to get lots of questions in, I know. So I'm going to move on to parent information. So the parent information section that's really where they're determining your financial aid from, is based on your parents' income, unless you're an independent student. So most of our students are going to be in the parent information section. The parent name you're going to put in question 60 is the parent you live with 51% of the time. So if your parents are married and file jointly, you're going to put both your parents in there, and that's fine. But if you're divorced, if your parents are divorced, you are going to list the income of the parent you live with 51% of the time. Now, my advice on this is if you are a 50-50 split kid who lives with their parents 50-50, then you stay one more night at the parent who makes less income, okay? One night, that's what we're talking about here. And that legally allows you to claim them and their income on your FAFSA form, okay? So that's the parent you're going to put on your FAFSA. Questions 84 through 87 are going to autofill through the IRS transfer. Now, parents, when you do this and the IRS automatically transfers that over, take a look at it. Don't just assume it's correct. Really kind of look at it and make sure it's showing things right. Your adjusted gross income is correct. Your investment income is correct. Those things are correct. Because if it doesn't transfer correctly, you can adjust that before you submit it. So make sure those transfer correctly. Question 28 talks about household income sources, cash, savings, checking accounts, okay? And it asks for the value of your checking account today. Well, I happen to know today is October 3rd. And I happen to know that I get paid tomorrow. So my account is really low right now, so I'm going to put that amount in. The other thing you can do is put in what you make that month, subtract all your payments out that you're going to make that month. If you have standard payments you make out that month, your house payment, your car payments, all those standard bills, take those out and then list that as the cash value in your checking account. Savings account is your savings account. List that. Question 89 is going to talk about your investments. And I'm actually going to kind of cover this in detail on the next page. But investments do include 529 plans. Even if they're in the student's name, it's going to go under here on the parent information, not the student investment information, okay? So if you have a 529 that's in your student's name, but you, the parent, are the owner of it, or your name's on it in any way, shape, or form, you're going to put it under parent information, because parents' assets are looked at a much different rate than student assets. Students' assets are looked at a much higher rate expected to pay for college than parent assets. So make sure those are showing up there. You do not have to include the value of your 401, your IRAs, life insurance, and pension plans. And it's the net worth of the asset. So it's the current value of the asset minus what's owed on the asset. And on the next screen, I'm going to give you a lot more detail on that. So we'll talk about that in a second. Hello. My daughter just popped in to tell me hello. Money paid to you, like say if a grandparents have a 529 and it's distributed to you as untaxed income, that will be reported in subsequent years on your FAFSA. But this first year, because the money hasn't been deposited out, you don't have it. It doesn't have to show up on your FAFSA. And rental properties. If it's in the family name, it's reported as the value of the rental property minus its debt. And I promise I'm going to talk about that more on the next screen. Question 92 talks about income you've received that's not taxable. IRAs fall into this category, but only if you've taken a withdrawal from your IRA. So most of us have not taken a withdrawal from your IRA, but if you've taken a withdrawal from your IRA that's untaxed, you do have to report that on line 92. Okay, here's my lovely assets page. See, I told you I'd talk about this a lot more. So on this screen, I'm going to go through assets that you have to report and then assets that you don't have to report. So you report the value of cash, even if it's stuffed under a mattress, in a cookie jar, under the sink, not in a bank account, it still needs to be reported. Bank accounts, checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, brokerage accounts, money market accounts, investments. So stocks, bonds, mutual funds, restricted stock options, exchange trade funds, hedge funds, all those things. If you own precious metals as an investment, those are going to show up. GMASs, UTMASs, those all show up. College savings plans. This is where these are going to come in. Your 529s, your coveralls, your educational savings plan. If you have a prepaid tuition plan, that's going to show up in here. Businesses, investments for farms, real estate, if you own real estate, trust funds, and emergency funds. And I'm going to talk about rental property, I think, on the next slide. Things you don't have to report. You don't have to report the value of your current place of residence. So if you own a house, you don't have to report that value. That doesn't count as an asset.
Amy, what about Bitcoin accounts?
I don't know what that is, Paul.
Okay, I'm not sure either. I've heard of them, but I'm not sure if that's something that's included.
I will look that up. That's in my notes. Okay, I will look that up and include that on the email that goes out with the webinar. Family farms don't have to be reported as assets. Small businesses owned that have less than 100 full-time employees. So if your family owns a small business, you do not have to report business income. And this is a way for families who own small businesses. You can lower your income by paying yourself less here in that regard. So that's one of the ways you can save a little bit.
What about 50% ownership in a partnership?
If it has less than 100 employees, you don't have to report it. If it has more than 100 employees, you have to report it. You have to report your share. So qualified retirement plans, you don't have to count 401ks, 403bs, 457s, pensions, annuities, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Simple, Kellogg's, all of those, you do not have to report. The only time you have to report those is if you take a withdrawal from those. So if you take a withdrawal from those are actually going to show up on your tax return under income. So it's going to kind of automatically show up, just so you know. Life insurance policies and the cash value of your life insurance policy does not have to be reported. So if you have a life insurance policy that you can borrow against, you don't have to report the value of that on FAFSA, and you can borrow against that at any time. So know that value in there doesn't show up on FAFSA. And things like personal possessions, you don't have to report your wedding ring, your computer, your boat, your car, that kind of thing. You don't have to report if you have a timeshare, because you don't own the entire property, you own a week of that property or 2 weeks of that property, so that does not count as real estate as a second property. Oh, I don't have that on here. I'm going to go back to the slide then. Okay, I don't have my rental property slide in here. Rental property. If you own the rental property and you're making money on it, that's going to show up in your income. But the value of that rental property is going to show up as a reportable asset. So you have to take the value of the rental property minus what you owe on the rental property, and that gives you the actual reportable asset value for the rental property. If you're somebody who has rental properties and wants more detail on that, email your coach and I will make sure you get sent that specific slide that kind of talks about how to value your rental property and how that will get reported as an asset. But that's really the key on rental property. It's how much it's worth versus what you owe on it. And by the way, not the appraised value, use the tax appraised value, because that's always lower than the actual appraised value. So it helps a little. So I'm gonna pop onto the chat line again here and see where we are on questions. If you have a second home, you have to report the value of the second home, minus what you owe on it, even if it's not a rental property, because it counts as an asset. It's not the home you're living in. So I know lots of families who will, when their kids go to college, will buy a house in the college town so they don't have to pay room and board. And then, you know, their kid gets a couple of roommates, they're charging some rent there, they're making payments on it, but that still the value of that minus what you owe on it still does count as an asset. What else? Borrowing against a 401k, you do have to report it. So money sitting in the 401k, saved for your retirement, FAFSA says money in your 401k is not for us to look at because it's not a liquid asset. It's not something you can access. Now, if you take a withdrawal from a 401k, that's going to show up on your income tax return, and then you're going to have to report it as an asset. So So know that if you use money in your 401k, then it's going to show up. Oh, I love this one. I always get this one. If your rental property is in an LLC, it's still yours. Unfortunately, I'll send you the information on rental property, but it's very specific about that. That even if it's in an LLC, it's still reported as an asset. They're very particular about that. Let's see. If it's a 50-50 partnership in a business with more than 100 employees, so there has to be more than 100 employees in the business, then you report it at your 50% value. Bitcoin counts as a commodity. I hate to say that, but it does. So it will show up in there. What else? For those of you with rental properties, do email your coach and I will make sure you get that specific information, because it's very clear and very specific about how you have to value it and how it has to show up. So there's a question on here about submitting your FAFSA and then you have financial changes. Do they go by the date you submitted it? What will happen, and I can talk about this in detail, I think, a little bit more, but you submit your FAFSA and then say somebody loses their job. That's probably the most common scenario with a huge change in income between the FAFSA filing, because it's using your tax return from 2018, and then say you lost your job in January of 2019. So it's basing it off of last year's income, not this year's. What you do is you wait for your student to apply and get accepted. And once they've decided on a college, you contact that financial aid office and you submit a form that's either called a professional judgment or a change of status form. And some colleges call it change of status, some call it professional judgment form. But what you essentially do is go in, fill out the form, and it specifically says, why do you have a change of status? And loss of employment is one of the top things on there. So you can just check loss of employment or whatever it is that changed your income status. And then you submit documentation to that. And then the college will do a professional judgment. Work closely with your coach on this. I've done this for 2 students in the past couple of years. And it's a pretty simple process. Both of them have gotten additional funding because of it. But you do need to make sure you get your forms filled out and all of that. But again, you're not going to do that until your child is accepted at a very specific college. Rental income. Rental income is going to show up on your tax return. So the income rental is going to show up in your income category. But you also then have to include the value of the rental property in your assets. And that's where that is. And that it's almost like taking a double hit there. If you borrow from your 401k, it doesn't get included? Okay. No. If your parents own a business under a corporation, but it has less than 100 employees, you do not need to report the business accounts or the value of the business. On question 22 for male students, Yeah, if they're not 18 when they apply, you still put no, and then you put register me. And then on their 18th birthday, it'll automatically register them. We have a handful of students. I have a student that's going to be this way, that when he goes to college, he's still going to be 17. So he won't turn 18 until into his freshman year of college. So you just click that register me button, and then it will do it automatically. And then there's no worry about the student having to go back and prove that they registered for selective service, which is really what the issue becomes. And so by them adding that button, you can automatically make that happen as soon as they turn 18, because they have student's date of birth on the form. You're going to start the FAFSA application in fall of senior year. If you fill it out junior year, they're assuming that you're going to college early, and you're not. So October of senior year is when you fill out the FAFSA. Okay, we're going to move on to what happens after you apply for your FAFSA. You've done all this work. You've filled out the form. Your family's financial information goes into a very crazy formula. And you can look the federal formula up online if you want to see it. It's fairly complicated, and different assets are valued at different things. I just say they do it. That formula, by the way, changes every year. So if you're a family that's kind of on the bubble, it could be one thing one year and different the next because of how that formula changes. And it's truly based on where the median income is that year, which changes every year in the US. So that's part of where that adjustment comes from. So what you'll get is what's called a student aid report. This contains the information submitted to FAFSA, but it also contains the amount that your student can be eligible for in aid. So as a coach, I always ask my students to send me this report. I think last year I got like 5 of them, maybe 6. This report can be really helpful to us as a coach because we can look at where we can go back and ask for more money, where we can ask for more loans, where we can play some colleges against each other. So really do send that form. You'll get that form on email, usually within 2 weeks of submitting your FAFSA. Right now, it might be a little slower because there's so many people submitting, but as soon as you have that, send that to your coach because that can really help your coach out. The other thing the report contains is your EFC, which is your expected family contribution. Now, the expected family contribution is what your family is expected to pay every year you're in college. So that EFC is a 1-year value. I know lots of families have looked at that and thought, oh, I'm only going to have to pay that much my kid's entire college career. And that's not correct. It is per year. So if yours comes back with an EFC of $20,000, the expectation is that you as a family will contribute $20,000 a year to your students' education, which is a lot. Like, so just be aware of that, and that's what that EFC means. And it's based on that crazy formula. But EFC also determines what is called need-based financial aid. And need-based financial awards are usually awarded to families who make less than $75,000 a year. But what I want to tell you about need-based financial aid awards is it's not a lot of funding. We're talking Pell Grants range between $5,000 and $7,000 a year. And then unsubsidized student loans, freshman limits are $5,500. So we're talking about $10,000 towards your college education for need-based financial aid, which really, when you think about the average cost of in-state college is $28,000 a year, it still leaves $18,000 out there of unmet need. So know that that's what's out there. But if you don't receive need-based financial aid, you're not losing a ton of money. Okay. Student loans, if you apply for a student loan, you have to complete student loan counseling. If a student doesn't complete loan counseling, they cannot receive a student loan. It only has to be done one time. Their first year in college usually is when students do it. It does take about an hour because it goes through all these different places about a student loan and what it is and how you pay it back and all the rules with it. And then you have to take a quiz on it. And if you don't pass that quiz, you have to do it again. So I always tell my students, know that you've got to do that and you should spend the time to do that. And usually we tell students to do that summer after senior year because there's plenty of time during that summer to take an hour and do your student loan counseling. There are two types of student loans. There's a subsidized student loan. And this is where the U.S. Department of Education pays the interest of the loan while you're in school. And as long as you're enrolled in school at least half time, which is 6 credit hours, basically 2 classes, it will continue to pay the interest on that loan. So if you had a subsidized loan for $3,000 freshman year, when you graduate, it's still a loan of only $3,000, which is super nice. Those are the best kind of student loans. I always tell my students that if you're going to take a student loan, if you have unsubsidized, please take that one. Unsubsidized student loans is you're responsible for the interest during all periods. So as soon as you take that student loan and transfer that funding into your bank account, you are accruing interest on that loan. So I always tell students, look at the loan, take what you need. So if you don't need all $5,000 of the unsubsidized loan, you only need $2,000, only take $2,000. And if you can, if you're working a job while you're going to school, pay a little bit on it. So it'll keep it under control. You do not have to accept any student loans, even if you're offered them. You could accept any part of them that you want. They will automatically award you the full amount of the student loan, even if you don't need it. So only take what you need, return back what you don't. Talk to your coach about this, especially if you're in that position and don't need the full student loan. If you only need a couple $1,000s of a student loan, talk to your coach about how to do that and make sure that process happens very early in the student loan process. It can save you a lot of interest and a lot of headache later. Student grants. Student grants are fantastic. These don't need to be paid back. Most student grants are usually only for tuition, but they oftentimes can be renewed. So when you get your freshman award letter, make sure you look at what's on there and look at what's a grant. And if it's a grant that can be renewed, oftentimes when you're comparing colleges, you want to go back and ask the college, can this grant be renewed every year? Because if it's only a grant for freshman year, then next year you're not going to get that grant. Your tuition is going to go up significantly. And that's a good way we can compare college and also go back and ask colleges for additional funding. Let's see. I'm looking at a question about student loans. Let's see. Is it a good idea to apply for a student loan? If you can get subsidized, you take it. If not, we don't. That's my advice. But if you need the student loan, go ahead and take it because there's limits on that. Freshman limit on student loans is $5,500. So as a student, you can't get a loan for more than $5,500 without your parents co-signing on the loan. And those are called Parent Plus loans. If one parent has passed away, does it need to mention in the parent section? This is what I would do with that, especially if that's happened since the tax return was filed. So if the tax return was filed with both parents still alive, married filing jointly, and now next year it's going to be a widower filing, you're going to do that professional judgment because the income this year has dropped significantly because there's one less parent. And that's really hard for a student right now as a senior. I can't even imagine that that's going to be really a challenging thing for them. So let them work with their coach, have their coach support them as they go through that process, because they're going to want to report that, because that's going to help them and probably increase their ability to get aid.
Amy, can you also look at the one from Melody about 2 kids in college there?
Yes. You have 2 kids in college next year. One will be a junior, freshman in college, and one will be a freshman. Okay. No, their FAFSAs will not be linked together, but you as a parent can fill it out, only have to fill it out once. You'll just do it separate. It lets you choose that on your parent account, and you choose that you have 2 students. The other thing you want to do is it has the number of students in college, total number of members in the family and number of students in college. You want to make sure that number is 2, because that increases your ability to get funding. But each student still needs to fill out a separate FAFSA, if that makes sense. But on your parent account, it shows up as, you can make it show, both of them will show as one. So once you fill it out for one, it'll automatically transfer that data to the other. Does that help? Okay. Talked about student grants, right? Yes, okay. All right. Save all your documents, please. This is what I say to do. Get a folder, write FAFSA 2020, 2021 on it. Put the tax return in there. Make sure the student's name and social security number is on the top of that tax form, because if you turn forms into the college without the student identification on it, they just go in a big binder and sit there. The colleges don't know what to do with those, so make sure the student data is attached to that. A lot now will let you file those electronically with them and upload them electronically. So make sure you have that available. Put a copy of the student's social security number on all documents, I said that. The student and the parent's tax return in there, and investment statements. They're probably right now, on average, 40% of students get selected for verification. If you get selected for verification, it's okay. They do this randomly to make sure people are filling out their documents correctly and providing accurate information. There are other things that turn on red flags for verification. And it can be as simple as your income is different than what it's reported on your W-2. And maybe that's because you have a rental property and you have 6 rental properties and you're getting a ton of income from your rental properties. But that will flag that verification pretty quickly. Students, once you have a college account, so once you've been accepted at a college, not that you've chosen to attend yet, but once you've been accepted at a college, you will have a financial aid account with that college. Make sure you check it pretty regularly, at least once a month, because colleges will put, we need these documents, we need this, we need that. You're being offered this scholarship, but you need to accept it by March 1st. That's where all that'll go to. It won't go to your personal email anymore. It'll all go to your student account, your college student account. So make sure you're checking that and completing any documentation they need. Most colleges will get your FAFSA within 2 weeks. So make sure you check that. Right now, I know students haven't even been accepted to colleges. Half of the applications aren't even due yet. You know, most applications, early decisions due November 1st. California and Texas are due November 30th. So right now you can't check that. But once those deadlines hit, I would say starting in December, check that student account and make sure that those are in there. Okay, this one's good. You have 2 students going to college. The parents are divorced and remarried. The implications of being remarried is that you will have to put the income for both you and your new spouse on the tax return, because you're going to be married filing jointly. Now, if that marriage hasn't happened yet and it's not on that 2018 tax return, then use the current one. But next year, you will see a significant change in that because that joint income will show up. The other thing that I have seen happen to students is if you put on that form that while you're not married, that you are living together, they will ask for whoever you are living with income. So they don't need to know that information unless they ask for it specifically. They're not going to unless you tell them, so don't. If you're married but filed separately, you're going to report it. It's going to ask you to report the parent that provides the most support.
We're getting a lot of very specific questions, Amy, just so you know that there's no way I can keep up with them.
Yeah, that's okay, Paul. Yeah, if you sold your property in 2018, your income this year is going to be significantly higher. And you're going to take a ding on that on your FAFSA. You can request a professional judgment because that income is going to be lower for 2019. They may or may not take that. I've seen it go a couple of ways. Most of the time, the financial aid officers will be like, well, yeah, you had a huge increase in your income that year, and so this year you're not going to get any funding, but next year you could be eligible for it because your income is going to be significantly lower. But you received that asset and that income. For married filing separately, whichever parent is claiming the child on their married filing separately. By the way, that is an automatic red flag for verification. And odds are the student is going to be required to provide income from both parents on that, on the married filing separately. Pretty good odds, I would say. The married filing separately has no advantage to your student financially on FAFSA for financial aid purposes at all. One-time income is going to show up on your FAFSA, and it's going to show up for the 1 year, and then the next year it's going to come off. Again, that's a case where you can ask for a professional judgment on that, and they can look at that, and they may award that, and they may not. I've definitely seen that one go both ways. And a lot of that depends on the circumstance and how much and how the money is inherited and where it is. Good questions, people. Really good. Okay, we talked about documents. I've got like 5 minutes left. To get help with your FAFSA, contact your coach. They can help you out. If they don't know, they're going to send it to me. I'm either going to know or I'm going to call my good friends in the financial aid office and they're going to help me with that question. You can go to FAFSA.gov. You can call the 800 number for FAFSA, or you can email them at studentaid@ed.gov. Now, all three of these are on the FAFSA website, so you can click right on them. The other thing I want to say to families is if your child or you as a student are applying to private institutions, private colleges often, while they have you fill out the FAFSA, they also require what's called a CSS profile. This is a completely separate financial aid form, and it is much more in depth. It looks at debt versus assets significantly differently than the FAFSA does. The FAFSA looks at assets and income. It does not look at debt. The CSS profile does. So if you're applying to a private college, let your coach know, do the CSS profile, send it to your coach for review. They'll go through it. You'll see the CSS profile is a lot more elaborate. There are about 350 schools who use CSS profile for their financial aid. The nice thing about that is those schools also tend to award a lot more funding. So it's worth filling out the CSS profile if you're applying to one of those schools. Oh, where did my thingies go? Thank you for joining us on the webinar for the Heartland Institute. And, oh, is that it? Okay. I'm gonna stop my screens here. So, other questions you have for me here in the last couple of minutes?
You'll have to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Thanks, Paul.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, if I, as a parent, establish an account, a FAFSA account 5 years ago for my eldest daughter, do I use the same account for my
Yes,
second child?
yes, you can. You just go on to your parent account and then it says add another student and you add that new student in.
Okay. Is it is it best to establish a new account?
If you've been using the other account and it's easier to just use that account because then you won't have to re-enter all that demographic information that you've entered before.
And then just a follow-up, the student income, if the student did not work last year, but then started working part-time this year, is that going to be reported?
Not until next year.
Okay.
And then student income, I didn't even talk about this, but student income, if student income is less than $10,000, it has no impact on the FAFSA. That's kind of the general, and it's not exactly 10,000, it's in that range, but.
Yeah. So if it's less than 10,000, do we just not report it?
Well, you don't have to report it right now because there's no place to report it right now other than cash in her bank account, probably right now.
Okay.
But she'll file a 2019 tax return. So on next year's FAFSA under student income, it would show up there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good
Hi,
question.
we have a question. Can you hear us?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so we were just wondering if we could get a copy. In the beginning, we kind of missed because we couldn't figure out the video. So we were trying to see if we can get a copy of this presentation.
Yes, we recorded it and we will send it out next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, I have a question. I'm a parent and I lost my FAFSA number for my reporting. How would I find my FAFSA number?
Log on to FAFSA and it says, forgot my FAFSA ID. Click on that. It's going to ask you a series of questions. It will regenerate it for you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
It can take up to 2 weeks on that, especially right now.
Hi, I have a quick question. For the question number 29, you said answer never attended college. So what happened if my daughter is actually now freshman in college and I'm trying to apply for the next year?
Oh, then report, there are lots of options on there. There are freshmen, sophomore year, junior, senior, grad student. So whatever she is. So if she's a sophomore, going to be a sophomore next year. If she's a sophomore this year, she's going to be a junior next year. So make sure you do it for whatever year she's going to be next year.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question. So we recently adopted our daughters, but we're still going through the legal process to finally adopt them. And so how do we claim them? Because right now we cannot claim them as dependents on our taxes. So I was wondering how that's going to work for us.
There's an actual question on the FAFSA that says, are you adopted or being adopted?
Oh,
and
is there? Perfect.
You're going to check that box.
Okay, thank you.
That's in the student question section.
Okay.
So officially right now, they could claim independent.
Okay.
Which means it would be based on their income.
Okay. So
and they don't have any, right? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So yeah, so that actually is on there as a choice in a series of questions.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I have
Go ahead.
My husband and me were students years before, and we have this FAFSA ID. So, is it the same ID as a parent? we applied for KID right now?
No, because your FAFSA ID is for you.
Okay,
And you want a parent ID.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I have a question.
Okay.
I understand that the FAFSA profile is not due until June 30th next year. However, you just said that like if you want some kind of scholarship might depend on that form, right?
Correct.
But the scholarship is awarded much earlier than June 30th.
Correct.
So that means we should file that form earlier, sooner.
Yes. The reason we encourage our families to fill out their FAFSAs in October and November, and I really tell people try to get it done by December 1st if you can, is because there is lots of funding that is awarded on either a first come, first served basis or first come, first need basis. So you could get more funding by applying early. If you wait till June 30th, the colleges have already awarded all their funding. So the only funding they have left, even if you have need-based funding, is what gets returned to them from students not attending the college. So yes, while it's not officially due till June 30th at pretty much every college, the sooner you do it and get it turned in, the better off you are.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you everyone for being on. If you have specific questions, please contact your coach. And thank you for being part of Heartland, and I hope this webinar was helpful.